we have with us Nihal Arthanayake, one of the most famous Sri Lankans in broadcasting in Britain. Welcome, Nihal.
Hi, Tina.
Thank you for agreeing to be part of our program.
My pleasure.
So my first question is, when did you realize you wanted to pursue a career in broadcasting?
I didn't realize it. I became a broadcaster when I was in my early 30s.
Mm-hmm.
I'd worked in the music industry before that, and I'd worked with artists like Elton John and other artists. So I'd worked in the music industry, and then someone rang me and said, BBC Radio 1, which is a big radio station in the UK, were looking for Asian beats DJs. So he said, you should apply for it. So I applied for it, and I got it.
When you said you were in the music industry before going into broadcasting, what were you doing?
So I was a PR, I was a publicist, so it was my job to get bands on television. So the record companies would hire me. I would then have to go out to the TV producers and say, you know, I've got this act, I've got that act. And my boss at the time, his biggest client was Elton John. So I spent a bit of time with Sir Elton. We were in New York at Madison Square Gardens, you know, watching him perform to 16,000 people. And just last year, actually, I saw Elton, and he was on stage, and he said happy birthday to me from the stage, which was very nice. I was standing next to the stage, and he said something very nice about me.
I do remember reading about when you got married, how they read out a telegram sent by him, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I remember reading about that.
And Jay Sean came to our wedding.
Okay.
When we got married. We got married at the Gore-Face Hotel, which is still my favorite hotel in the world. And
Okay. So did you have to undergo any formal training as such to work at the BBC?
No, I mean, the thing about a career in DJing or broadcasting is you just have to do it. Like, you can go to university and do broadcast, media studies, journalism, but I didn't do any of that.
Do you think you were quite lucky to go in via that route?
You know, the thing about luck, Tina, and I would say this to all the young viewers of High, is that luck only lands in your lap if you work hard, right? Like, luck doesn't come, knock on your door, walk into your living room, walk upstairs, go into your bedroom, knock on your bedroom door and say, hey, it's luck, let me help you out. Luck happens when you put a lot of work in, you go out, you meet people, especially when you're in your 20s. And you know, in my 20s, I was everywhere in London. I was at all the big clubs, the cool clubs. I was out and, you know, I met people. So I had a network. I had a, you know, an extraordinary network, which I have to this day, of lots of people in music, in theatre, in the arts, in literature. I know a lot of people, so, you know.
How would you describe your work ethic?
Look, if you do something you love, it will never feel like work. So, I don't know. I don't know how to describe my work ethic because I love what I do. I'm very blessed that I get to meet some of the most interesting people in the world. You know, there are 4 or 5 of the authors here that I've interviewed. I've interviewed Ramesh Gunasekara, I've interviewed Shahan, I've interviewed Sebastian Faulks, Alexander McCall-Smith, Mary Beard. Like, I've done all that, right? So, and in the UK, I'm regarded to be one of the best interviewers on radio anywhere in the UK, right? Because I've done so much of it, you know.
And with the programs with the BBC, how much freedom do you have, or how much freedom are you given? Do you have certain guidelines that you have to follow?
We have very strict guidelines, so we can't express any opinions about politics, about businesses. You have to be impartial. So the word impartial is a very important word for anyone that works in BBC News. If you don't work in news, if you work more in the entertainment side, you can have a little bit more freedom. But for me, I work in BBC News. My show, my radio show, which has over 1 million listeners a week, I have to be very impartial.
Okay. And you recently, I think you were in the news recently because you mentioned that working with majority of white people had kind of affected your mental health. Do you want to explain more about that? Because when I read that, I was like thinking, what is he saying? So
Yeah. So when you see, when you're a minority
yeah,
and you live in the UK, it can be very difficult if you're, so say for instance, if you're a woman and you work in an all-male environment, right? So you don't have anyone that kind of understands what it feels like to be a woman,
can relate to.
right?
Yeah.
So anyone you can relate to, eventually, over time, that can feel lonely. It can feel isolating.
Right.
You can feel that there are people who don't understand you. They don't understand your background. You can't share common things. So as a
Right.
woman, for instance, you know, if you're going through the menopause or you're having your period, then, and there's all men there, right? Men might say something ignorant or rude, and you don't have anyone to back you up, right?
Right.
So similarly with me, I moved to Manchester. Manchester has a very multicultural city,
Yeah.
right? But my working environment wasn't very multicultural. And over time, that made me feel lonely. So when I articulated that, the right-wing press in the UK, they just used it as a stick to beat me with. And then thousands of people, my name was trending on Twitter. You know, it was crazy, and lots of racists. Because people would say, it's a majority white country.
Yeah.
Are you saying you don't want to work with white people? That wasn't what I was saying. What I was saying is, I wanted to work in a diverse working environment, because that's where I've always worked. You know, I've been at the BBC for 20 years, and for over 10 years of that, I'd worked in London. And in London, it's very diverse. And I thought Manchester was diverse, and it is diverse. But sadly, the place where I work isn't very diverse. Now, they are doing something about that, but all the racists and all the idiots, they jumped on it, and they just started going, you know, you're in a white country. And they'd say to me things like, imagine if I came to Sri Lanka and said there's too many brown people here. And I said to them, but, so let's say Colombo, right?
Right.
London is 46% ethnic minority.
Yeah.
Now, if Colombo was 46% white, you would expect to work with white people and brown people, right?
Yeah.
But Colombo isn't 46%
Yeah.
white. So making the comparison is as stupid as the people who made it in the first place. So when people said, you don't complain about Sri Lanka, I just said to you, it's a stupid comparison.
Yeah.
They'd say, they say, well, imagine if I went to Nigeria. And I went, yeah, but Lagos isn't 46% white, right? The UK is a multicultural, especially in the cities. Now look, if I worked in the countryside, Tina, I wouldn't complain.
Yeah,
Because
you know
because
that,
I know.
yeah.
But like I said, Manchester is 1/3 ethnic minority. 1 in every 3 people is brown or black, right?
Person of color.
Yeah, but that's not my working experience.
Yeah.
And I criticized the BBC for that. Like I said, this is not good enough, because the BBC has its own targets,
Right.
and it's not meeting them.
Yeah.
Right? It's not meeting the targets it sets itself. So I got into loads of controversy. Piers Morgan wanted me to go on his show.
Did you?
No, of course not. Piers Morgan is an idiot. Like, why would I waste a second of my time talking to that idiot? I would never do that. Like, I don't care about Piers Morgan. He makes no difference. But equally, you know, my name is, I speak to 1 million people a week, right? Like, in terms of being a Sri Lankan, to have an audience of that size. And also I do lots of other things. Like, I'm writing a book I'm writing my second book now. So I'm also as well, it's important that you stand up for what you believe in.
Yeah.
And quite often when you say things that are controversial, you will get a lot of stick. But you just have to put up with that. The amount of people of color who contacted me and said, I know exactly what you mean. Thank you for saying it. I feel seen now. Those messages blow away all the racists. Like, literally, that message, when I got those messages, I also got so many messages from white women saying, we understand, because we've worked in male environments where we haven't been listened to, where we felt alone. So, you know, you got to sometimes, you know, I don't mind. I'm not being controversial for controversy's sake.
But you felt you had to make the statement.
Look, I was at a diversity conference, and it had been really affecting me for some time. Like, I would walk into the office, I'd look around the office, and I would see nobody who looked like me. And like I said, if that was in a village, in the middle of the countryside, then I wouldn't
Fair
expect to.
Yeah.
But working in Manchester, I expect to see a diverse. Look, I don't want to work with all brown people either.
You wanted a healthy mix.
Yeah, I don't want to work with all Sri Lankans or Indians or Pakistanis or Bengalis or Nigerians or Kenyans or Ghanaians. I want to mix. I want to, because, Tina, I'm in the storytelling business. I tell stories. The best stories come about when you hear people's different experiences, right?
Yeah.
Like if you just spend your time all the time with Sri Lankans, right?
Yeah.
Now, that's fine if you live here, but if you live in London and you don't have any other friends, then I think that's a problem.
Yeah.
And my second book is about integration.
Okay. Why do you think there are only a handful of Sri Lankans in broadcasting in the UK?
Well, I mean, look, right?
Because apart from you and now Romesh.
Yeah. Well, there was George Alagaya before, but he sadly passed away.
Of course, yes.
He sadly passed away. Look.
And Shama Pereira from years ago.
Yeah, Shama Pereira from years ago. You know, there are Sri Lankans doing other things behind the scenes. It's not always about who's in front of the camera or who's on the microphone. It's about, and also let's be real. Sri Lanka, we're a small nation. The fact that Romesh and I are in positions we are, I think it's, and also as well, Tamil and Sinhalese, it's great.
Yeah.
Ranganathan and Arthanayake, which shows that we're Sri Lankans, we're all Sri Lankans, I think is amazing. And Romesh and I are good friends, and we support each other's work. And look, rather than saying, why isn't there so many, say, actually, for a small nation, look how many Bangladeshis there are, look how many Indians there are, Pakistanis. Sri Lanka is a tiny nation. Sri Lanka's entire population is like the same as Mumbai, right? But yet, there are two of us, but there are also other Sri Lankans behind the scenes doing really interesting things in London. There's a new generation of Sri Lankans coming through. Sri Lankans are very successful in medicine and in law. So, you know, we're an incredible group of people. I'm so proud of my Sri Lankan heritage. And I love it. I mean, look where we are. Imagine having this as your second country that you can come to, right? Like you could have some really cold, miserable place, like where your parents came from. I have literally paradise on earth. And that's what this is. I mean, it has its problems, but the UK has huge problems
too,
right? So, yeah, I think Sri Lankans are, and hopefully, you know, I'm 53 this year, Ramesh is in his 40s. Hopefully, there's people now who are like 18, 20, who are saying, well, they've done it, so I can do it.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah. I think people like us who work in media, our role is to inspire people as well. Tell stories about inspiring people.
Yeah.
That's very
That's why,
important,
like, Romesh has been on my 5 Live show, right? Now, if I wasn't on BBC Radio 5 Live, would Romesh be on it? I don't know. Ramesh Gunasekara and Ramesh Ranganathan probably would be because he's super famous in the UK.
Yeah.
But I'm always on the lookout. Shehan, for instance, Shehan's been on my 5 Live show. And I interviewed Shehan, I think, before he won the Booker Prize. So, I mean, look at us. Shehan won the Booker Prize, right? Like, this is insane. For a country the size of Sri Lanka to have an author that won the Booker Prize? Crazy.
Can you give us a little sneak peek into what your second book is about?
Yeah, it's about integration, right? So it's about, as ethnic minorities become a larger part of British society and in other parts of the world, we can't segregate ourselves away from each other.
Right.
So I'm essentially saying we have to start a conversation about integration because it doesn't happen naturally. People have to be encouraged to do it, otherwise we'll create, but also, importantly, it's not just about ethnic minorities integrating with white people, it's also about white people integrating with us, right? It's a two-way. There's a two-way, and often integration is seen as it's us that have to do it, because somehow we're the other, right? But actually, we're all British, right? I was born in Britain, so the responsibility is as much yours as it is mine to get to know each other. And once we get to know each other through integration, Tina, that's how we lose our prejudice and our bigotry, because we end up getting to know you. You're not just a Muslim, you're Khalid or Mohammed, right? You're not just a Hindu, you're Priya, and I know you. I know your family, I know, and then you understand each other. So when politicians or racists try and divide us, we can say, well, wait a minute, that's not my experience of meeting Muslims or meeting Hindus or meeting Buddhists or Sikhs or Jews. It's not my experience. And that way, the more we interact with each other, I think the less prejudice there will be. But I am concerned that we are potentially becoming more segregated.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And I want to write a book about that.
Okay. You raised an important point that actually struck a chord with me as well. Like, I'm sure, like your parents, my parents left Sri Lanka in the 50s. And although they went there at a time when racism was at its height. It was like no blacks, no dogs. But still, for all, people like my dad, they made the effort to integrate with English people, with Irish people, with whatever communities. And they encouraged us, the next generation, like you and I, to be like that. Do you find the current crop of Sri Lankans that go from here, they are going back to a state where they don't want to integrate, they just want to be in their little, I wouldn't want to use the word ghettos, but they want to be in their little communities, doing their own thing, they don't want to mingle, they don't want to integrate. Do you see that with the Sri Lankan community, or do you associate closely enough to make an observation?
Well, firstly, I think it's dangerous to make generalizations of entire communities. So there will be some who do and some who don't. Secondly, there is a feeling amongst a lot of ethnic minorities in the UK that the UK is going backwards when it comes to race relations. It's not going forward. So the conversation around refugees and around immigrants makes a lot of people of colour feel very nervous, because when you're being horrible about immigrants, you're talking about our parents, right? You're talking about our parents, you're talking about people who look like us. So that's why I think, rather than blaming those communities, I think you also have to look at the host community and see how welcoming it is and how it's making, and a lot of the language at the moment in the UK is not very welcoming to people, right? And there's this big debate around 745,000 net migration to the UK. Now, what do those people do? Some of them work in the NHS, some of them are care workers. They're coming here to do jobs. Now, imagine if you're a doctor or a nurse, come from India or Sri Lanka to work in the NHS, and in the newspapers it's saying you're an immigrant and there's too many of you. Like, how would that make you feel, right? But equally, to your point, we should also mix, right? We should also not just go, right, where do all the Sri Lankans live? I'm going to go live there. I'm going to go and live in Tooting. I'm going to go live in Wembley. I'm not going to mix with anyone. All I have to do is speak Tamil or Sinhalese, and that's it, right? Like, equally, we should be mindful of that. Like, if you're living in a country where you're 20% of the population, then it's kind of crazy not to understand the 80%. And I grew up in a very white area. I grew up in a little village in a place called Essex, outside of London. So I've been around white people my whole life. But equally, I couldn't wait to go to London, where I didn't feel like a minority anymore. And since I've moved out of London, I feel like a minority again, right? And feeling like a minority is a very unsettling feeling, because some people will make you feel like that.
My final question, can you tell us a bit about your work with the British Asian Trust?
Yeah, so King Charles's British Asian Trust is an extraordinary organisation, a charity. I was asked to be a trustee on the governance, but when I moved to Manchester, I resigned. But now I'm an ambassador for the trust. It's an incredible organisation that really does look at not giving out handouts, but really trying to generate livelihoods, to educate girls, to fight against human trafficking, to really make a difference, but in a very entrepreneurial way, right? And I think that's unique and innovative. King Charles has a huge love for South Asia, for India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. He very much understands it. He's very keen to understand what the issues are. I've hosted a number of events with him and spoke to King Charles when he was Prince Charles. I haven't done one since he became king, but with Prince Charles. And he's very hands-on, right? Like he loves this part of the world. And it's a powerful charity, you know, it does a lot of work.
As an ambassador, what sort of work do you have to
Well,
do?
I mean, so, you know, I was on a big game show in the UK recently, and my charity of choice was the British Asian Trust, so you mentioned that.
Right.
But also if there are events, and also I advocate for the British Asian Trust, so for instance, I've just connected them with someone who's an educator, a young educator, and she's Pakistani, British Pakistani, and I've connected her to the British Asian Trust. So it's really about networking, and if they want me to host an event, or then I will come and do that for them.
Right. Thank you so much, Nihal, for spending some time with us. I hope you have a lovely festival.
Oh, so do I. So do I. Tina, thank you.
Thank you.